Terrarian in the Dungeon, Chapter 3b, Fan Fiction by Azazyel. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for listening and patreon.com/Azazyel to read all of his stories. But finally, after like 10 minutes of endlessly walking down the staircase that seemingly wanted me to walk down into the center of the world or something, I finally reached the first floor of the dungeon. After I managed to get away from the crowd of people still walking deeper into the dungeon for the daily grind of possibly losing their lives, by going into one of the first floor side passageways. I then took out my copper broadsword to arm myself in my right hand, and then, after a pause, I took out my staff and placed it in my left hand, as it's not like I had a shield, nor would I get one that could strengthen myself until I killed Eye of Cthulhu or got its drops. God, I look weird as hell, I muttered, taking in my wooden armor, a broadsword made out of copper of all materials, and of course the magic staff with being made of damned tin and topped with a thumb-sized topaz gem. Going deeper into the dungeon side passageway, I was met with a four-way intersection, and I froze as I realized that I didn't actually have a map of the dungeon's first floors, so after a moment of thought I just went straight, as I could always retrace my steps by simply going straight. Hiss. I heard a monster hiss, and then from the shadows between the eerie dim lights came a duo of goblins, all but sprint at me, and the brief moment of losing them in my vision as they ran between the more lit sections of the dim corridor for a moment made me panic, but then I took a deep breath and with a mental flex I sent out a bolt of magical energy towards the goblins from my topaz staff. The amber light from the topaz staff's rather slow-moving bolt of magic lit up the corridor, and then with a loud snap the light collided with the sprinting goblin's chest. It couldn't move out of the way quick enough from how it was sprinting towards me. Feeling the drain on my mind, I didn't chance using the staff again, not exactly afraid of mind down after just 2 spells, but I didn't know what would happen if I became actually low on mind, plus with only one goblin still rushing at me. I made my topaz staff disappear into my inventory so I could hold my broadsword with both hands to meet the flying tackle coming from the charging goblin. The flying goblin, however, was not met with colliding with my armor so it could attempt to take me apart or whatever murderous ideas that were running through its head. Nope, it was met with the brutal overhead chop from my downward swing that caught the goblin on its shoulders, and despite the copper broadsword's poor stats, the combined momentum of both my swing and the charging goblin made my sword slice/crush its rib cage, and with a poof of smoke I felt my sword collide with the magic stone and shatter it within the monster's chest. Magic, the monster poof into smoke, leaving me with nothing. With my first ever killed monster out of the way, I looked up and saw the goblin who I hit with a bolt of magic struggling to its feet. The sight of it made me shudder, as the topaz staff, despite being one of the first magical weapons in Terraria, still was a weapon, and it did its job perfectly, as the bolt of magic had all but cored out a human fist-sized chunk of the goblin's upper chest, leaving its busted rib cage and organs plain to see. Wordlessly I took out the topaz staff again, feeling myself already having regenerated the bit of mind I used previously, and then with another mental flex I sent another bolt of magic at the goblin, and with a wet popping noise, the goblin fell over as the bolt of magic hit it, right in the face, evaporating a chunk of its brain or something. Yeah. I definitely want a supporter to do this. I muttered, grimacing as I took out of the carving knife Seshet loaned me so I could pry aside the ribs of the dead goblin that I killed, so I could grab its fingernail-sized monster crystal at the center of its chest. Even as I took the time to pull out the magic stone, I realized that this single monster crystal from a common goblin was all but completely worthless, despite the goblin technically doing its damned best to tear out my throat with its nasty claws, despite me taking the front of its rib cage off with a spell. The next group of monsters I saw was a trio of kobolds, and the fuckers were just jabbering with one another with growls and grunts. So rather than their attempt to hit them with the topaz staff from like 20-odd meters away, I silently took out the copper short bow, and was so grateful I had a background of living in the damned sticks and knew how to use a bow, even if I was more used to compound pulley hunting bows. 20 meters in an enclosed area shouldn't need much adjustment, I muttered, drawing on the copper short bow with a wooden arrow pulled. After a breath I centered my shot at the kobold that was facing me, and I let go of the arrow fly from the bow with a soft zipping noise as it cut through the air. Thankfully, with my wooden armor, I didn't have to worry about any chaffing from the string snapping forward, as I certainly wasn't used to this bow and got caught by it, but thankfully my aim was still true, and with a choked gurgle of surprise the arrow slammed home into the upper chest just below the kobold's neck, despite me aiming more for the heart of the humanoid form. Then I once again switched weapons with a mental flex as my copper broadsword appeared inside my hands, and once again I did the same strategy as before by hitting one of the mindlessly charging kobolds with a shot from my topaz staff, and then instead of breaking the monster crystal on the last charging kobold, I just sidestepped its flying tackle so I could bring my broadsword down onto its spine, which with a whimper left it crippled and dying. Looking over to the kobold I shot with an arrow, I saw it had already ripped out the arrow I hit it with and was making its way toward me with that said arrow as though it was going to stab me with it. So not wanting to deal with being stabbed, I took out the bow again, and as it reached the 10-meter mark I hit it with another arrow in the chest, making it stagger as it was still choking on the blood that came from its first arrow that hit just below its throat. "Just die, damn it," I muttered, grimacing as it took another 3 arrows for the damned kobold to collapse onto the ground. I sighed with suppressed, almost hysterical giggles as the monster collapsed onto its front, but with my Terraria arrows being indestructible, the arrows just went completely through the kobold, with the sharp pointed ends poking through the monster's back. After cleaning up the site of the battlefield and taking all the loot while collecting my arrows, I just had to take a break and clear my head, so I just slid down the rough walls of the dungeon and just held onto my head with my hands as I tried to bring back up my metaphorical sanity meter. My gear was perfectly fine for here in the dungeon. I wasn't a bad fighter as I knew how to take care of myself and not expose myself to too many risks, but still. "I don't like doing this alone," I muttered as I furtively stared down the side hallways and couldn't help but think about how utterly alone I was here in the dungeon. I had no backup, I had no friends here in Orario, and even my goddess, who was part cat, may just enjoy watching me suffer in the name of getting stronger at times. I need to use my summons, fuck Orario's opinion. I am special, and I doubt people will bother me unless I get into some super summons anyway. I spoke with more confidence, and then with a flourish I dipped Squire Squirrel's staff downwards, and with a rattle as the large acorn on the end shook, colliding with the wooden parts of the staff it was attached to by a vine, I heard a chattering noise as the knee-high tall muscular squire appeared out of nowhere. Thankfully this summons, although it was clearly labeled a sentry and thus more of a static turret than a freely roaming being, I was able to cheat the system by placing the large squire on my armored shoulders and above my head. "Well, let's see what you can do," I muttered as I heard the chittering of a single goblin coming around the corner, and then, as per usual at the sight of me, it screamed in fury at seeing a mortal in the dungeon and ran at me with murderous intentions clear within its red glowing eyes. But as it closed in on me, and I waited for it to approach while I held on to my copper broadsword, I could only burst into honest laughter as the damned goblin was met with a brutal soccer ball-sized acorn of all things being thrown into its face like a baseball pitcher attempting to break his own record at throwing his ball as hard as he could. "I name you Sir Fluffykins, the First," I said through coughing chuckles as the insane demonic squirrel above me chattered as it gleefully kept throwing its conjured acorns with bone-breaking force at the goblin, who just gave up on life and just rolled up in a ball to avoid the pain. Seeing how pitiful the goblin was, I put it out of its misery by stabbing my copper broadsword down into its head as it cowered under the cruel battery of Sir Fluffykins the First's barrage of acorns. "With you throwing one of those acorns every 3 or 4 seconds and being able to disable a goblin or kobold, I can be bolder, I suppose," I muttered as I considered how many goblins I could actually safely manage, and came to the realization that so long as I had some space to control the fight, I could easily deal with 4 or 5 goblins by using my topaz staff, as the goblins and kobolds always ran at me with zero sense of self-preservation until they themselves got hurt.